The sound of my mother's hand striking my wife's face is a sound I will never be able to unhear. It cut through the Christmas music and the clinking of glasses and the warm yellow light of my parents' dining room, and for one endless second, the whole family just froze. My wife Claire stood there with her hand rising slowly to her cheek, 7 weeks pregnant with the child we'd waited 9 years for, and her eyes found mine across that table. And in her eyes there was no anger, there was only a question. A question she'd been asking me silently for 11 years of marriage, and that I had answered wrong every single time. The question was, are you going to fix this too, Michael? Are you going to smooth it over, ask me to be the bigger person, tell me it's just how your mother is? For 43 years I had been the son who fixed everything, the peacemaker. The one who held the family together no matter what it cost. And in that frozen second, with my wife's cheek turning red under her own trembling fingers, something in me that had been bending my whole life finally broke, and I stopped. I stopped being that son, and the truth I uncovered in the weeks that followed didn't just end my role as the family fixer. It burned down everything I thought I knew about my own mother. Before we go any further, I want to thank you for being here with me tonight. If this story has already found the tender place in your chest, do me a small kindness and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. It truly helps these stories reach the people who need them. And a gentle word before we begin. Some names and details in this account have been changed and dramatized for storytelling and educational purposes, and any resemblance to real people is coincidental. But the heart of it, the lesson folded into the middle, is as real as anything I've ever lived. My name is Michael Carter. I'm 43 years old, and for most of my life I had one job in my family, though no one ever named it out loud. I was the fixer. When my parents argued, I was the one who made the peace. When money got tight, I was the one who found a way. When my younger sister and my mother clashed, I was the one who stood in the middle and absorbed the blows from both sides. I was the reliable one, the steady one, the good son, and I wore that title like a badge because it was the only way I knew how to be loved. My father was a man named Robert Carter. He was a quiet, decent man who worked 40 years as an electrician and never once, that I saw, raised his voice or his hand to anyone. My father was the calm at the center of our house, and my mother, Patricia, was the weather. She could be sunshine, warm and generous, and the life of every room. And she could be a storm that came out of nowhere, a coldness, a cutting remark, a silence that could last for days until someone, usually me, did whatever was required to bring the sun back. I learned very young that keeping my mother happy was the most important job in the world, because when she wasn't happy, the whole house suffered. And I was good at that job. I made it my life. My father died 8 years ago. A heart attack, sudden, in the garage he loved, surrounded by the tools he'd used his whole life. He was there in the morning and gone by lunch, and when the calm at the center of our family disappeared, I did what I had always done. I stepped into the gap. I became not just the fixer, but the man of the family. And my mother, newly widowed and I believed frightened and fragile and alone, leaned on me with all her weight. And I held her up because that was my job, and I loved her, and I thought that love meant never letting her fall no matter what it cost me. What it cost me, I would eventually learn, was very nearly my marriage. And what I didn't understand for 8 long years was that my mother was never falling at all. She was holding on, and there is a world of difference between the two. Let me tell you about Claire, because she is the true hero of this story, and she suffered the longest and the most quietly of anyone. I met Claire 11 years ago, and I knew within a month that I was going to marry her. She is kind in a way that's almost stubborn. She's a nurse, a labor and delivery nurse, which means she spends her days catching new life in her hands, and she comes home glowing even after the hardest shifts. She saw the good in everyone, including my mother, especially at first my mother, but my mother did not see the good in Claire. From the very beginning, there was a coldness there that I made 1,000 excuses for. Patricia would make little remarks about Claire's cooking, about her family, about the way she kept our house. Never anything you could point to directly. Just a steady drip of small cruelties, each one deniable, each one leaving a mark. And every single time I did my job, I fixed it. I'd take Claire aside and say, "That's just how Mom is. She doesn't mean it. She's from a different generation. Please, honey, just let it go, for me, for peace." For me, for peace, I said those words to my wife so many times over 11 years that I'm ashamed to count them. I asked the woman I loved to swallow her own dignity again and again so that I wouldn't have to face the storm. I told myself I was keeping the family together. The truth is I was feeding my wife to a fire so I wouldn't have to feel the heat myself. And Claire, God bless her, she did it. For years, she did it. Because she loved me and she believed that if she was just patient enough, just kind enough, just gracious enough for long enough, my mother would finally accept her. She kept trying to earn a love that was never, ever going to be given, because the withholding of it was the whole point. There was something else too, something that made those years even harder. Claire and I wanted children badly, and for a long time we couldn't have them. There were losses, 3 of them over the years, each one a small funeral we held in private. And through all of that grief, do you know what my mother would say? She'd sigh and she'd say things like, well, maybe it's for the best. Some people just aren't meant to be mothers. To my wife, to a woman standing in the wreckage of another loss. She said that, and I, the fixer, would rush in and change the subject and later tell Claire that Mom didn't mean it that way and ask her please to let it go. I look back now and I do not know how Claire stayed. I do not know how she loved a man who kept asking her to set herself on fire to keep his mother warm, but she did. She stayed, and she waited, I think, for the day I would finally choose her. She waited 11 years for that day. And it came at last in the worst possible way, with a red mark on her cheek and a house full of silent witnesses. There was one more thing running underneath all of this for 8 years, and it was the thing that would eventually blow the whole story open. The money. After my father died, my mother came to me and she was crying and she told me she was in trouble. She said my father had left debts she hadn't known about. She said the house was mortgaged in ways she didn't understand. She said her pension wasn't enough and she was frightened and she didn't know how she was going to survive. And I did what I always did. I fixed it. I told her not to worry. I told her I would take care of her, and I did. For 8 years I sent my mother money. It started at $1,000 a month, then $1,500. For the last several years it had been $2,500 every single month wired to her account without fail. $210,000 all told over 8 years. Money that came out of my family's future. Money that Claire and I could have used for the fertility treatments we struggled to afford. Money for the down payment on a bigger house we kept putting off. I sent it to my mother because she was a frightened widow who needed her son, and being needed was the air I breathed. Claire, to her credit, questioned it. Gently over the years she'd ask, Michael, does your mom really need that much? Her house is paid off, isn't it? Where does it all go? And every time I got defensive, I told her she didn't understand. I told her my mother had sacrificed everything for us kids and this was the least I could do. I told her, and I'm ashamed of this most of all, that if she really loved me, she wouldn't begrudge my own mother a roof over her head. I used my wife's love as a weapon against her, to protect a lie I didn't even know was a lie, because here is what I didn't know. Here is what I would not let myself even wonder. My mother's house had been paid off free and clear since before my father died. There were no secret debts. My father, that quiet, careful electrician, had left my mother a pension, a life insurance policy, and just over $400,000 in savings. She had never, not for one single day, been in any danger of not surviving. The frightened, fragile, penniless widow was a role, a performance, and the $2,500 a month was never about need at all. It was about the leash. As long as I was writing that check, I belonged to her. As long as she needed rescuing, I could never fully leave. My money was the rope that kept her son tied to her side, and she had spent 8 years pulling it tight. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because I didn't know any of that on the night my mother slapped my wife. On that night, I still believed every word of the story I'd been told. On that night, I was still the fixer, right up until I wasn't. Now stay with me here, because we've reached the night that changed everything. But first, do me a favor. If you have ever bent yourself out of shape over and over to keep the peace in a family, if you have ever swallowed your own dignity to avoid someone's storm, type the word peacemaker in the comments below. I want to know how many of us there are. And a gentle reminder, this story weaves together dramatized and fictional elements for the purpose of storytelling and reflection. If that's not your cup of tea, I understand completely, and you're welcome to step away. But if you want to know what finally breaks a lifelong peacemaker, stay right where you are. It was Christmas Eve. And it should have been the happiest Christmas of our lives, because after 9 years, after 3 losses, after all that grief, Claire was pregnant, 7 weeks along. We had seen the heartbeat on the little screen, a tiny flickering thing that made us both cry right there in the doctor's office. And we had decided, cautious as we were after everything, that we were finally ready to share it. That Christmas, with the whole family gathered at my mother's house, felt like the right time, a gift, a new beginning. I imagined my mother's face lighting up. I imagined her crying happy tears and holding Claire's hands. I imagined, fool that I was, that a coming grandchild might finally soften whatever had been so hard in her all these years. The dinner was lovely at first. My mother was in her sunshine mode, gracious and warm, the perfect hostess. My sister Laura wasn't there, of course. Laura hadn't come to family Christmas in nearly 10 years, and I had my mother's explanation for that filed away neatly in my head, the one I'd never questioned. That Laura was selfish, ungrateful, that she'd broken her poor mother's heart by walking away. My brother Kevin was there but distant, the way he always was, quiet and watchful, leaving early. It was mostly me and Claire and my mother and a few relatives, and after the meal, when the coffee was poured, I stood up and I took Claire's hand and I made the announcement. "Everyone," I said, and my voice was thick with joy. "Claire and I have some news. We're going to have a baby. Mom, you're going to be a grandmother again." The room erupted the way rooms do. My aunt gasped, my cousin cheered, Kevin actually smiled, which was rare. And I turned to my mother, waiting for the joy, waiting for the tears, waiting for the moment that would make all those hard years worth it. And my mother's face did not light up. It went cold. That coldness I knew so well, the storm rolling in. And she set down her coffee cup very precisely, and she said, in a voice like a January wind, "Well, I suppose we'll see if this one takes, given the track record." The room went quiet, and I felt Claire's hand tighten in mine. Given the track record, she was talking about our losses, our 3 private funerals. On the night we announced new life, my mother reached into the deepest wound my wife had, and she pressed on it in front of everyone. I opened my mouth to do my job, to smooth it over, to laugh nervously and change the subject, but before I could, Claire spoke, and her voice was calm, steadier than I'd ever heard it. She said, "Patricia, I've spent 11 years letting you say things like that, and I've decided I'm not going to do it anymore. Not now, because I will not raise my child to think that's how family speaks to each other." She wasn't cruel. She wasn't loud, she just finally, after 11 years, drew a line, and she added quietly, "And Michael and I need to have a conversation about a lot of things, including why we've been sending you $2,500 a month for a house that's been paid off since before Dad died." I remember the exact silence that followed, because in that silence I saw something flash across my mother's face that I had never seen before. Not hurt, not sadness, fear. The naked fear of someone whose game has just been named out loud. And a person like that cornered doesn't get sad, they get dangerous. My mother stood up, and she crossed the space between herself and my wife, and she slapped Claire across the face hard, an open-handed crack that echoed off the walls of that warm, yellow room. And time stopped. I have replayed the next 3 seconds 10,000 times, Claire's head turning with the force of it, her hand rising slowly to her cheek, the gasp from my aunt, and Claire's eyes finding mine. And that question in them, the question of 11 years. "Are you going to fix this too, Michael?" And for the first time in my entire life, I looked at my mother, and I did not see a fragile widow who needed protecting. I saw exactly what my wife had been trying to show me for over a decade. I saw a person who had just struck a pregnant woman in the face for the crime of telling the truth. And every excuse I had ever made, every "that's just how she is," every "let it go for peace," every rope she'd ever tied around me, all of it snapped at once. I did not yell, I want you to know that. I have thought a great deal about what a man should do in that moment, and I chose, even then, not to become a storm myself. I simply walked to my wife. I gently took her hand from her cheek, and I looked at the red mark rising there, and I looked at my mother, and I said, in a voice so quiet the whole silent room had to lean in to hear it, "You will never touch her again. And you will never see this child, not until you have become a person who deserves to." And I picked up Claire's coat, and I put it around her shoulders, and I walked my wife out of my mother's house. And behind me, my mother's voice changed instantly, from cold fury to wounded tears. "Michael, Michael, you can't do this to me. After everything I've sacrificed," she provoked me. "Michael, come back here right now, you're my son." The fixer in me, the 43-year-old reflex, twitched to turn around, to go back, to make the peace, to fix it. I did not turn around. I got in the car with my wife and I drove us home, and it was the hardest and the most important thing I have ever done. That night was the longest of my life. Claire cried in my arms and I held her, and I apologized for 11 years all at once, which of course you can't do, but I tried. And somewhere around 3 in the morning, with my pregnant wife finally asleep against my chest, I lay awake in the dark and I let myself, for the very first time, ask the questions I had spent my whole life refusing to ask. Why had I never questioned the money? Why had my mother's house needed $2,500 a month? Where had Laura really gone, and why? Why had my brother Kevin, always so quiet, left every family gathering early with that watchful look on his face? What had my mother meant by "she provoked me," as if striking a pregnant woman were something anyone could provoke? For 43 years, I had been so busy fixing my family that I had never once stopped to look at what I was fixing. A fixer doesn't ask why the thing keeps breaking. He just keeps patching it over and over and calls it love. But that night, for the first time, I stopped patching, and I started looking. And what I found underneath all those years of quick repairs was a foundation rotted straight through. The first thing I did 2 days after Christmas was the thing I had been avoiding for 10 years. I called my sister Laura. My hands were actually shaking as the phone rang because I didn't know if she'd even pick up. We hadn't had a real conversation in a decade. In my mind, she was the sister who'd abandoned our poor mother, the selfish one, the one who broke Mom's heart. That was the story I'd been given, and I'd never once thought to check it. Laura picked up on the fourth ring. "Michael," she said, and her voice was cautious, braced. "Is everyone okay? Did something happen?" And I said, "Laura." Mom slapped Claire across the face at Christmas. "Claire's pregnant," and I walked out. "And I need you to tell me the truth, all of it, the truth about why you left, because I don't think I ever knew it." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then my sister started to cry, but they weren't sad tears. I would come to understand they were the tears of someone who has been waiting 10 years for a phone call, who has been holding a truth so heavy for so long that finally being asked to set it down feels like a kind of grace. "Oh, Michael," she said, "I've been waiting so long for you to ask me that." And over the next 2 hours, my sister told me the story of our family, the real one, not the one Mom had written. Laura hadn't abandoned our mother. Laura had fled her 10 years ago after years of the same cold cruelties, the same manipulations, the same storms. Laura had finally set a boundary of her own, and my mother had responded by launching a quiet, vicious campaign to destroy her. Turning relatives against her, rewriting history, telling everyone, including me, that Laura was ungrateful and selfish and heartless, and I had believed it. I had believed it completely, because it never once occurred to me that my mother could lie like that so smoothly, so totally about her own child. "She does it to everyone eventually, Michael," Laura said gently. "It's a pattern. She finds the person's deepest need, the thing they want most from her, her love, her approval, and she dangles it just out of reach forever. And she keeps you working for it, keeps you fixing and appeasing and sacrificing, and you never get it, because giving it to you would mean she's no longer in control." She paused. "You were the golden child, the fixer. The one who never stopped trying to earn it." Kevin went numb and pulled away. "I got angry and got out, but you, Michael, you just kept paying, in money and in your marriage and in your whole self. For years I watched from the outside and I ached for you and for Claire. I wanted to warn you, but she'd poisoned it so well that I knew you wouldn't believe me. You had to see it yourself." "The money," I said, my throat tight. "She told me Dad left debts, that she was struggling." Laura actually laughed. "I gathered it all, Laura's account, Kevin's when I finally called him and heard my quiet brother exhale 10 years of held breath. Ellen's confirmation of the finances, the bank records of every dollar I'd sent. And when I had it all laid out in front of me, clear and undeniable, I called my mother and I asked her to meet me, just the two of us, not to scream at her, not to punish her, but to look her in the eye with the truth on the table and finally stop being the son who fixed everything. She'd been calling and texting nonstop since Christmas, cycling through every tool she had, tears, guilt, rage. Playing the victim. "How could you abandon your mother? That woman has turned you against me. After everything I sacrificed, I'll die alone and it'll be your fault." Every message was a rope thrown out trying to pull me back into the water. And for the first time in my life, I let them land in the sand. We met at her house, at the kitchen table where I'd eaten 10,000 meals as a boy, and my mother came out swinging with the performance, the tears already flowing. "Michael, thank God, I knew you'd come to your senses. I knew that woman couldn't keep my own son from me forever." And I let her finish, and then I said quietly, "Mom, I know about the money." She stopped. The tears paused just for a flicker, and I watched the calculation happen behind her eyes, the same look I'd seen at Christmas. "I know Dad left you the house paid off. I know about the pension and the insurance and the 400,000 in savings. I know there were never any debts. I have the estate records, Mom. Ellen Marsh confirmed all of it. So I need you to look at me, and I need you to tell me the truth. Why did you take $210,000 from your son and his wife, money we needed, when you were never in any need at all?" And my mother, cornered at last with no rope left to throw, did something I did not expect. The performance cracked, and underneath it, for one raw moment, I saw the real thing. She didn't get angry, she got small. And she whispered, "Because it was the only way I could be sure you'd stay." I sat with that. It was the truest thing she'd ever said to me. "After your father died," she went on, and her voice was shaking, "I was so afraid, not of money. Of being left, of being alone." Laura had already gone. Kevin was slipping away, and I looked at you, my Michael, my good boy, and I thought, if he needs to be needed, then I will need him. Forever. I will make sure he can never fully leave, because a mother who is being rescued is a mother who is never abandoned. She looked up at me, and there were real tears now, not weapons. "I did terrible things, I know I did. I drove your sister away, and I lied to you about it. I was cruel to Claire because every time you loved her, I felt you leaving me a little more, and I hit her. I hit that lovely girl because she said out loud the thing I'd spent 8 years hiding, and I panicked. I'm not asking you to forgive me, I know what I am. And here is the moment, friends, here is the crossroads where the fixer in me raised his head one last time. Because my mother was crying and she was, for the first time, telling the truth, and every cell in my body that had spent 43 years soothing her wanted to reach across that table and say, "It's okay, Mom. We'll figure it out, I'll fix it." But I didn't, because I finally understood something that took me my whole life to learn. Understanding why someone hurt you is not the same as agreeing to keep being hurt. I could have compassion for the frightened woman my mother was underneath, and I could still refuse to let her hand near my wife's face ever again. Both things could be true. That is what a boundary is. It is love and a limit held in the same hand. So I said, "Mom, I believe you, and I'm sorry you were so afraid. I really am, but I'm not going to fix this. Not the way I've always fixed things. Here's what's going to happen instead. The money stops today. Not because you don't have enough, but because it was never about that, and we both know it. I'm going to be a father now. My family, Claire and this baby, they come first, completely. And you are not going to be part of our lives or our child's life until you've done the real work to become someone safe. Not sorry, safe. That might take a long time. It might take a professional. It might never happen at all, and if it doesn't, I will grieve you, but I will not sacrifice my wife and my child to keep you comfortable. I love you, and I am done being your rescue. You'll have to save yourself now, Mom." It turns out you've had everything you needed to do that all along. And then I stood up and I kissed the top of my mother's head, the way she used to kiss mine, and I walked out of that kitchen. And this time when she called my name, I understood that not turning around wasn't cruelty. It was the first honest thing I'd ever done for both of us. Let me tell you how it settled, because I know you want to know. The money stopped and the world did not end. My mother, it turned out, was perfectly capable of living on the very comfortable resources my father had left her. Funny how that works. The immediate crisis I'd spent 8 years bankrolling had never existed at all. The truth spread through the family, quietly, the way truth does once someone finally speaks it. My aunt, who'd witnessed the slap, called me to apologize for all the years she'd believed the story about Laura. Relatives who'd been fed a decade of lies began, slowly, to see the pattern for themselves. And the most beautiful thing came out of the worst thing. My sister Laura and my brother Kevin and I, 3 siblings who'd been divided and conquered and turned against each other for years, found our way back to one another. We started talking, really talking, for the first time since we were kids. We compared notes and grieved together and eventually laughed together. My mother's greatest weapon had always been keeping us apart, isolated, each of us alone with our own version of the story. The moment we put our stories side by side, her power over all of us simply dissolved. Laura and Kevin and I are closer now than we've been in 20 years. My mother took a lot from us. But in the end, she accidentally gave us each other back. Claire, my Claire. I spent the following months trying to become the husband I should have been for 11 years. I couldn't undo the times I'd asked her to swallow her dignity. But I could make sure I never did it again, and I could tell her every day in 100 ways that she came first now, not as a consolation prize, as the truth. The night I walked her out of my mother's house was the night our real marriage began, and it has been, I am not exaggerating, a completely different marriage since. Lighter, honest, free. She told me months later that for 11 years she'd felt like she was married to a man with an invisible third person in the room always, and that after that Christmas, for the first time, it was just us. Just the 2 of us in the family we were building. She said it felt like coming up for air. Our son was born in July, 7 pounds, 9 ounces, with Claire's stubborn chin and, I swear, my father's hands. We named him Robert after the quiet, decent man who was the calm at the center of my childhood, little Bobby. And when they placed him in my arms, this brand new person, this fresh start, I made him a silent promise. I promised him that he would never once have to be the fixer, that he would never have to earn my love by soothing my storms, because there would be no storms for him to soothe, that he would grow up knowing love is not a rope. Love is an open hand. I am breaking the chain in my generation, Bobby, so it never reaches you. That's the promise. And my mother, I'll tell you the truth because I promised you the truth. It's been a little over a year and she is not in our lives yet. She calls sometimes. In the beginning, the calls were the old ropes, the guilt and the tears and the accusations. But lately, something has been different. A few months ago, she called and she didn't ask for anything. She just said she'd started seeing a counselor, that she was trying to understand why she does what she does. That she knows she has a lot of work to do and she's finally doing it, not to get us back, she said, but because it's the right thing whether we come back or not. And that gave me the first real hope I've had. I don't know if she'll get all the way there. That kind of change at 71 is rare and hard, but she's trying for the first time in her life to save herself instead of demanding that someone else do it. And whether or not that ever earns her a seat at our table, it means she might find some peace before the end, and I want that for her. I do, because underneath everything, she is still my mother and I still love her. I've just learned that loving someone and rescuing them are not the same thing. They never were. So here's what I want to leave you with tonight, whoever you are, wherever you're listening from. And I want to speak to two different people because I think you're both out there listening, to the fixers, to the peacemakers, to the ones who have spent a lifetime bending yourselves out of shape to keep someone else from storming. I want you to hear this. Keeping the peace is not the same as making peace. Real peace cannot be built on your silence and your swallowed dignity and the dignity of the people you love. If you have to set yourself on fire to keep someone warm, that is not a family. That is a fire. And the day you stop feeding it is not the day you abandon your family. It is the day you finally start to build a real one. Boundaries are not walls against love. Boundaries are the shape that love has to take to survive. It took me 43 years and a red mark on my wife's face to learn that. Please, don't wait as long as I did. And to the mothers and the fathers listening tonight, and I know so many of you are, I want to say something gentle but true. The tightest grip loses the most. I have watched my own mother, out of a fear of being alone, do the very things that guaranteed she would be. She held on so hard that she drove away all 3 of her children, one by one. If you love someone, especially your grown children, hold them the way you'd hold water, open-handed, not clenched. Let them build their own families, love their own spouses, live their own lives. Need them a little less and you'll find they want to be near you a great deal more. Love that controls is not love, it's fear wearing love's coat. And your children can always tell the difference, even when they spend 43 years pretending they can't. I believe there is grace even in the hardest family stories. I believe my quiet father is somewhere at peace, glad his son finally found the calm he carried. I believe my Bobby will grow up free of a weight his father carried too long. And I believe that it is never, ever too late to stop being the person who fixes everything and start being the person who simply loves well, with an open hand and a firm, kind line. I have to believe that. It's the truest thing this recovering fixer ever learned. If this story reached something in you tonight, do me a kindness. Leave a comment and tell me about it. Tell me about a boundary you finally set, or when you're still working up the courage to set, or a family you had to grieve while its people were still living. Share this with someone who needs to hear that keeping the peace and making peace are not the same thing. And if you'd like to sit with me through more stories like this one, go ahead and subscribe, and I'll be right here waiting. One last thing before I go. As always,